The supernatural is real, and eventually, it all leads back to one place: Christianity. We're going to take a deep dive into the best encounters and experiences of the last year of this podcast, as well as feature one brand new experience. All that and more on this best of 1 year anniversary edition of Spirit Answers Podcast. Well, Taya, thank you so much for joining us on Spirit Answers Podcast.
You're welcome. Nice to be here.
You have an incredible encounter story with God, one that's both supernatural and very comforting. And I don't want to give too much of it away, so I will just let you share your story. What happened?
Yeah, so it all kind of started when I was like 14 years old. I think it was 2013. When I was really young, I kind of fell and I hurt my leg. And the way that I fell, like I thought I like bruised the front of my leg, so I didn't really think anything of it for a while. And then after a while, like a knot kind of appeared on my leg. And so then I was like, hey, I should probably pay attention to that. And so a few weeks later, it just kind of seemed to get bigger. And then I was like, that don't seem right. And then I went and I talked to my mom about it. She was like, yeah, that's not okay. So she took me to the doctor the next day, actually. And they diagnosed me like soon after with osteosarcoma a couple weeks later. And so about a month after my diagnosis, they did treatment. It was let's see, probably like, it was a 3 month long chemo treatment. And
Wow.
then after the 3 months, they wanted me to have a leg reconstruction surgery where they took out the bone and the cancer.
And real quick too, I mean, that's incredible. What is that diagnosis? I would repeat it, but I would definitely butcher that name. Can you kind of just give us a brief understanding?
Yes.
What does that mean?
Osteosarcoma. I don't think about the fact that other people don't know what that means just because it's been a part of my life for so long.
Sure.
But osteosarcoma is a bone cancer in the leg.
Wow.
So, yeah, I ended up with the knot the size of about a softball size knot on my leg. It was right below the knee in the location area.
I was going to ask you. So was this a result then of that fall?
Yes, I fell, and the impact of the fall actually triggered the cancer cells that are naturally in your body. Like everyone has natural occurring cancer cells in their body. And for some reason, when I fell, it triggered it. And usually, osteosarcoma is diagnosed in people who play lots of sports or like do cheerleading or football and stuff like that because they're getting hit a lot, they're falling a lot, and that impact ends up triggering it. But for me, it was just kind of an unlucky day where I just fell and smacked my leg on the gravel.
Wow.
But yeah, so that was where it kind of all started. And then so it was 3 months of chemo and then the leg reconstructive surgery where they actually removed my bone from mid thigh to above the ankle. So I have like a whole fake knee and then two rods that go like down into my ankle and up into like the upper thigh area.
Wow.
So it's it was definitely a journey trying to relearn to walk. So that was probably my one of the hardest things that I had to go through in the process is just learning to walk again. But so that's kind of, oh yeah. After the leg reconstructive surgery, I had another 9 months of chemo just to make sure that all of the cancer cells had been fully removed by the chemo. So it ended up being more of like a 2-year process in all, with all of the recovery in between.
And how old were
So
you again?
I was 14, and I think I was about 16 when it all ended, if I'm remembering correctly. I don't have the greatest memory due to all the medications that I was on, but I think I'm remembering that correctly.
Yeah, that's already a tough period, I think, 14 to 16 without going through this type of ordeal. I'm sure that was a really, really challenging couple years.
Yeah, so that was kind of like, it was definitely not easy for me. I had my ups and downs. I was really sick. I went through a lot of depression and stuff through it, anxiety, and I was in denial about it as well. Like when I when my mom realized that I was going through a state of depression, she had gone and talked to the doctors about it and was like, "Hey, we should probably get her on some medication." And I just remember being like, "You don't know what you're talking about. Like, I'm fine." And I told the doctors, "There's nothing wrong with me. I'm fine." Because I was in that denial state of, I don't want to be diagnosed with depression. Like, there's nothing wrong with me. But after that state of denial, I eventually was like, well, yeah, maybe I do need help. So, because I lashed out at my mom a few times over it, but then she was like, okay, yeah. I was like, okay, yeah, maybe I should, seek help.
Mm-hmm.
And so I did, and I ended up going to some different therapies and stuff like that. And then all of the depression and stuff was like leveled out. So there was that was a something that I had to overcome. And then there was also my weight struggle. So like a very light person as is only weigh like 96 pounds wet. So like naturally I'm light, and then I lost 30 pounds
Wow.
in the start of my process. So I actually ended up 70 pounds
Wow.
as a teenager. And they were like, we are going to have to do something. So I ended up having to have feeding tubes that like go down the nose. But that ended up being one of those trial and error things, because I kept like, this is a little graphic, but I kept like vomiting them up because I was nauseous all the time due to the chemo. So I would vomit it up, and then they would have to remove it and replace it. And they did that so many times that I finally was like, I can't do this anymore. Like, I can't keep fighting these tubes. And so then they were like, okay, well, let's try something different. And so they were like, we're going to go in surgically and put in a stomach tube around the stomach area. And so they surgically put one in, and it ended up saving me, like in that sense of where I was just withering away into nothing. Um, they would feed me daily, and then on top of that, I was on a medication to help me eat more as well, to give me more of an appetite. So I was eating on top of already having 2 to 3 meals a day through the tube. So I was eating like double the amount that you're normally supposed to, and I ended up gaining all that weight back. So that was another one of those struggles and trials that I went through during that. But I think the biggest one of all was definitely out of nowhere. It was very like spring the moment kind of situation. So I had had my chemotherapy for the week. I had gone home and I was just chilling because at this time I had gotten used to the chemo and it wasn't affecting me as hard and as harsh. So I was able to go home and like hang out with my family. And so I'm just chilling, laying on my pull-out couch because that's what I had to do because I was unable to sit properly with my leg surgery. So I was always laying in a bed. So we had the pull-out couch in the living room, so I didn't have to stay in bed in my room all the time. And I was like, you know what? I have a really bad headache. So I told my mom, hey, I have a really bad headache. And she was like, well, let me check your temperature because they say that if, the doctors had told her if I ended up with a headache to check my temperature first thing because it could be a sign of a high temp. And so she did. She came and she checked my temp, and it was like I think it was like 104 or something like that. It was really, really, really high. So they had to like rush me to the hospital. I can't remember. I want to say it was by ambulance because obviously my temp was so high. I don't have the greatest memory from it. So I just remember when we got to the hospital, I was like, hey, we got here really fast, and so they rushed me up to the top floor and I was like, wow, they're getting me in really fast. That's weird. It usually takes forever. I don't know why they're in such a rush, because obviously as a kid, they don't tell you everything. They don't tell you everything that's going on. And so, like, everyone's seen that there was something wrong and they were like rushing me to the places that I needed to be. And so the eighth floor was the child chemo floor. So they rushed me up to the eighth floor of the hospital. And I was just in a room like I normally would be if I was getting my chemotherapy or something. And the nurse comes in as usual and checks my blood pressure and my like temperature and all that stuff as usual. And to me, everything just seemed normal until the nurse put the cuff on my arm, took my blood pressure, and looked at me. And she was like, I was just sitting there having a conversation with her casually, like laughing, goofing off, being my normal goofy self because that's how it was when I was a kid. And then she looks at me and she was like really confused. And I was like, what? And she was like, I don't think this is right. I'm going to check your blood pressure one more time. And I was like, okay, yeah, that's fine. And she put the cuff back on the arm and restarted the thing, the pump or whatever it was called. I really don't know all the terms for that, but the blood pressure pump
Mm-hmm.
thing. Oh my gosh, what is that called?
Yeah, I'm right
She,
there with you. I couldn't tell you. I have a lot of
I have no
knowledge
idea.
here.
But she put the blood pressure cuff on me
Right.
and she started it. And then she was like, okay, yeah, it's still showing 20/30. And I don't know if you know anything about blood pressure, but I think a normal blood pressure is supposed to be like 70/90 or like 80/100, like
Yeah.
80/100. So that's like a normal, and mine was 20/30.
Wow.
And so like she instantly got this panicked look on her face. And I was just like what's going on, And so I'm just still casually conversating, that's not a word, casually conversing with like my mom and the nurses and stuff as they're rushing me to ICU. And I get to ICU and I'm just sitting there talking to my mom, cracking jokes with the nurses like I usually do. And they were giving me plasma. And plasma, when they're putting it in the like in your body through IV and stuff, the way that it looks, it like bubbles up real bad in the container that it's in. And so I just look at the nurse and I'm like, haha, look, it looks like dish soap. I don't know why. That's like one of my very intense memories. I just remember looking at the nurse and being like, hey, that looks like dish soap. That looks funny to me, you know? And I was like, why are they putting dish soap in me? You know? I was young and I didn't really understand everything. So, and then my mom's sitting there on the side of my bed and she's like, just holding my hands, and I'm just sitting there talking to her, and she looks concerned, and they take her out, and she leaves the room for a second, and my mom told me later on that they took her outside and they were telling her to prepare for the worst because they didn't know if I was going to make it.
Wow.
And so she comes back in and she sits down and she's just like, hey, just rest and relax and just stay awake for me, girl. Just, you know, keep pushing, and I'm just sitting here like, hey, I really got to use the bathroom. So I, I was like sitting there. All I could think about was I really got to go to the bathroom. So I look at her and I'm like, hey, mama, I have to go like now. And she was like, really, like right now, you can't wait? I was like, please, I really have to go to the bathroom. She was like, okay, just, and she looked at the nurse. She was like, can she go to the bathroom? And like, still at this point in time, I'm still like 20 over 40. Like, I'm still in like coma state. I'm not supposed to be talking to people and responsive and completely aware of everything that's going on. And so she's like looking at the nurses, asking the nurses, hey, can she go to the bathroom? And they were like, yeah, just let her go if she thinks she can go. If you want to help her, you can help her. And I was like, I don't need help. I'm fine. Like, I can get up and go to the bathroom by myself. And like, I know that's like, not something that you would usually like bring up in one of these types of stories, but to me, like, that was a miracle for me to be able to just stand up and go to the bathroom when I was sitting there on death's door.
No kidding.
I didn't
Wow.
know it, but everyone else knew it, and so they're just like, hey, okay, if you can do it, you can do it. So I got up and I walked to the bathroom and I used the bathroom, and then I walked back and I laid back down, and they're all just like looking at me with this like shocked look, like, well, what's going on? And I'm just like, what? And they're just like, nothing. Like, because they didn't want to say anything to me. And so I'm just sitting there chilling, and I'm kind of getting tired because like it had been a really long night, and it was probably like 4 a.m. at this point. I'm just so tired. My eyes are getting heavy, and I'm like, I really want to go to sleep, but I don't need to go to sleep. And so I was like, I fought in it, and then in my head, I started to hear this really loud voice saying, hey, keep your eyes open, stay awake, stay aware, stay awake. I was just like listening to that voice, and I was like, okay, yeah, I'll stay awake. I'll keep my eyes open. Don't go to sleep, you know? So I'm like listening, and fighting the sleep because all I want to do is just go to sleep. But for some reason, the voice in my head just wouldn't let me. And so I fought it until finally later on they come in and they're like, well, her blood pressure is starting to level out a bit, her temperature's dropped. She's fine to go back up to the 8th floor and she doesn't have to be in ICU anymore. And that, that was the turning point. And from that point on, I was like, you know what? Like, was like looking back after everyone told me everything that was going on, like they didn't tell me in that moment. It's one of those things that I didn't notice in the moment that it was a God thing. because I was too young to understand. I was too young to understand that I was dying and that that was going to be the end. But
Wow.
like years later, my mom told me, "Hey, you know that day they were telling me outside that you were going to die and that that was going to be your last moments on earth." And then I looked back and I was like, "Whoa." So wait a minute, that voice wasn't just my thoughts. Like when I think back to the voice, that voice that was in my head wasn't me. It was a male voice. And in my mind, that was God's voice. That was the Lord telling me, "Hey, keep kicking because you got this." And to me, like, that's all I can ever think about. Anytime that I'm struggling, anytime that I'm like, "Hey, like, what's going on in life? Like, why is life so hard?" I just think back to that moment of like, "Hey, God's looking out for me. God's looking out for each and every one of us in different ways." And like, even though we're struggling, even though we're going through all of these trials in life, it's not gonna be the end of the world. Like, you can get through it. And I
Mm.
struggle a lot still to this day with depression and anxiety and all kinds of like long-term effects from the chemo that I've went through. But and sometimes like I still am like, why? Why did I survive? Because I still don't understand like why, God keeps me on this earth, but I gotta just think like he has me here for a reason, or he would not have done the things that he has done for me in the past. So I just hold on to that every day.
Yeah.
So
Wow.
yeah, a little bit of a all over the place kind of story, but
Mhm.
hopefully, it made some sort of sense.
Yeah, no, definitely. This is it might not make sense to certain people, but for me and everyone listening, it makes total sense. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. Um and I love the way that you put it, which was well, a couple parts there. One being that you recognize all this time later that that was not your voice. It was a male voice, even though I'm sure with everything that you were going through at the time, it was really hard to put, two and two together and understand exactly what was going on. But you recognize
Hmm.
now that there was a supernatural component to this, and how amazing
Yeah,
that,
definitely.
yeah, yeah, and how amazing that in and of itself is. But then you shared with us what's going on behind the supernatural part of it, which is the relational part, and how not only in that moment was that an incredibly sounds like comforting and helpful experience that you had, just to tell, like you said, telling you to keep on going and don't give up, but that you can still use that all this time later, uh, in the difficult moments that you've since encountered, and you can
Yeah,
recognize that there is a greater plan at work here, and you are being guided. I think that is just
definitely.
so cool. Yeah, so beautiful. um
Yeah, anytime that, I ever question things, like I always go back to that moment and there's just no denying it. There's no denying that God is here and he's protecting us,
mm,
you know? So,
yeah, wow. I'll tell you, I can't thank you enough for taking the time to share this testimony with us, and just so thankful that there's, because I know you shared with me before that you've been able to share this with some people, just in your day to day life, but to for God to be able to create a platform that you can get this out to more people, just so thankful for that, and just again,
mhm.
what a beautiful, comforting story.
I mean, it's just crazy to think that there is a purpose for me here, or that wouldn't have happened. So I just hold on to that always, you know? So,
Yeah, yeah. Well, I know that it's comforting for you, and I'm sure will be comforting for many others as well. So thank you again for
oh,
joining
yes, I
us.
sure do hope.
Yeah, no, I know it will. So yeah, thank you again for joining us today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Shiri had an incredible encounter with Jesus where he appeared to her in a way that she would understand. From what I understand, when Jesus showed himself to you, it was in a way that you could comprehend.
Exactly. This to me was incredible. How, of course, wise God is to appear, because there's so many people that had experiences of seeing Him, but each experience is different. So He appeared to me as a Jew because He knew that would be the safest thing. First of all, He's a Jew, right? Of course, but He didn't appear to me crucified on a cross in a Catholic church, because if I had seen that, I wouldn't respond to this vision. He came to me in a way that is familiar to me, wrapped in a talit, which is the prayer shawl of the Jews. And even his sandals were the ones that we learned about in kindergarten, like the ones that Moses wore. I mean, I saw that and I knew I was home.
Hey, everybody, just a real quick check in to remind you to submit your testimony to be one of the guests that's featured on this podcast. Whether you're listening to this on a podcast app or watching this on YouTube, you can find the email address to submit your video testimony or written testimony, or perhaps even recommend someone else's testimony in the description below. Again, I really appreciate all you do to support the podcast, and thank you so much for your support throughout the last year. I hope you enjoy the rest of the episode.
I might just pray for me. I don't know.
In episode 41, we featured another encounter with Jesus on the podcast when Valeria found out the deceptive nature of ayahuasca and everything that she was involved with from the New Age, including the Egyptian god Thoth, disappeared before her encounter with God.
Something's going to happen tomorrow. So it all started. I drank I had a drink, the ayahuasca. I lay down and I'm just waiting the same sort of process, because it usually was like a process. It sort of started and I didn't know it was happening. It was happening. And then I started like going through a bit of a dark journey, and then bam, I was showing all the beauty. And in all this, and I was interested in all these like journeys. I was shown things like, the Indian Americans, they were playing and then showing me the fly of the eagle. And it's like, and it was showing me like in a mantra, like focus, release, and fly high. And it was insanely crazy beautiful. So when I was working out that in one of those, in a previous ayahuasca ceremony, I remember like seeing this massive snake that came. It was a massive head of the darkest snake I could have even seen, but it was so dark. It was so enticing, and it was calling me, and I'm going, and I'm feeling, the passion that you feel when you're experiencing sex, and it's just endless. It's just like an addiction. So in that moment, I could hear the word Artemisa, Artemisa, and then it was like this. I don't know, I was somehow very connected to the Indian, the Native Americans. So they telling me, call Artemisa, call Artemisa. And then I'm like calling Artemisa, and it's like Artemisa, and it will go away. It's like Artemisa, and go away. And I will go back into focus and, alignment and everything. So it was all these insane things that I was told and I was seeing there. That's why it just felt so legit. So I was experiencing the spiritual world and the craziness that is out there. So after that, pretty much I was expecting that, I was in a journey. I'm expecting to see all these things and the thoughts and the lessons, and suddenly I started feeling the darkness and all the things I felt like were nice before. It felt like, I'm like, what am I doing here? This is horrible. And my first idea was like, these are demons. They're demons. They're like, and I felt so frightened. And I'm thinking, please, I just want to see the things that I used to see. Where are they? Where are they? And then I feel the presence of the most almighty thing you could ever think of or feel. And I suddenly felt I was on my knees, and I could only see I couldn't see his, I could only see his feet. I could see his feet, like in his throat from the back. And I know it's Jesus.
Wow.
Jesus is, yeah. And suddenly the word saying deceived, deceived, deceived. And it was
Wow.
coming like deceived, deceived. And all the images of everything I've been doing came past, like just like in a movie, through my eyes, deceived. And bang, and thought comes up like that, standing right in front of me. It's like deceived.
Wow.
Oh, I was like, yeah, it was. I was like, I felt like I wanted to, like I was like crunching, thinking, oh, everything I held onto so tightly. How can I be like? How was I deceived? Like, how can this be wrong? And then Jesus is there. He was there. I couldn't see his face. It was him, his presence, and he was pretty much just saying, I suddenly he saw his feet, and just by looking at his feet, it was like the understanding of who he was. Like his walk is the real walk, humble. And I could see his feet with, the sandals, and the sandals. It just told me everything about him. He's a humble man. He's the
Wow.
way. He is the way. You follow me. And then he was like, you follow me. You walk with me, along with me. And I'll show you, and I'll reveal with you the things that you need to know as we walk together. And he's like, no, none of this. Leave it outside. Doesn't matter. And my question was like, how is that bad? Like, because I was just struggling to renounce it all. And I'm thinking, how is all this bad? And he's telling me, money. Money. And I thought, okay, yeah. It's like healing is free. Healing through Jesus is free. Like, this is money. And then I started seeing the link, like taught with the Native Americans, with the Mayas, and everything was just showing me. It was just too much. And then suddenly I see his hand, and I see the nail being like, hit on in his hand, and his blood splashes on me. And he says, you're covered now in my blood. You got my blood now with you. It was, yeah, that was it. That was, after that, I saw it, and I was sold. For me, that was it. It was like, that's it. What am I doing here? I know Jesus, and he did it like that. He showed me everything. His presence was like almighty, and it finished. It was like this, bang, like people putting stop to a movie, and I was out of the journey early. When it used to last like 7 hours, 8 hours, I was out of there like in 2-3 hours, I think.
There needs to be a word that explains to be fully known.
Some encounters with Jesus, of course, come by way of near-death experiences, such as the case for Wendy, who back in episode 11 shared her near-death experience where she had a life review of her own life, as well as given the opportunity to witness Jesus' life, both on planet Earth and before he got to Earth while he was in heaven.
Or a runaway, or living with pedophile to pedophile to pedophile. I had so many secrets. And all of a sudden I'm at the feet of what I'm sure is Jesus, and I'm loved even though he knows my darkest secrets, and I'm loved at a level that you cannot fathom with your earthly brain. There's just no words. I wish I could describe it.
Wow.
And on earth, we use our 5 senses to discern everything, right?
Right.
But in heaven, you use your soul. Lots of spiritual people don't walk with God would call it their 6th sense, which, but I'm telling you, that's the voice of God. That's your soul. That's the Holy Spirit talking to you. And that's where you perceive everything. And in heaven, everything's alive. I knew the meaning of every molecule around me. I had the answers I'd been seeking my whole life. I didn't even have to ask them. All of a sudden, my brain was firing at a level that it had never fired at.
Wow. That's incredible. And I've heard this happen several times from other people that have had a similar encounter on the other side with Jesus. It's almost like this experience is more real than life itself. Is that right?
Yeah. In my book, I discuss that. It's trying to explain heaven, which to me is far more real than Earth. Earth now feels like a nightmare. When you get to heaven, you're like, oh, thank God it was just a nightmare. It wasn't real. This is forever. That's temporary. The world we live in now is disposable. We live in a disposable society of self-seeking, self-loving, narcissism, selfishness. And I was leading the parade on the other side of heaven.
And I understand as well when it comes to what happens in your time on the other side, it wasn't only this incredible experience of love and being known, but there's a process. I'm not sure if we're there yet, where Jesus shows you your life and shows you the different parts of your life where you could have done more to glorify him.
Absolutely. So I believe if you're to put my heaven encounter in a nutshell, it would be the refiner's fire. I believe that what happened to me will happen to everybody, saved or not saved. You could be a Satanist. You're still going to be at the feet of Jesus one day. And your experience will be very similar to mine. Whereas when I finally opened my eyes, I couldn't look at Jesus's face. The hole in his feet is just huge. I couldn't even look at his face because I wasn't worthy, because it was me that put that hole there. And I was so ashamed because, have you ever been on a road trip or a long drive and you arrive at your destination and you're like, wow, I don't even remember the drive. It went by so fast. I don't remember any of the landmarks. Okay, well, that's what it feels like when you get to heaven. You're like, whoa, wait. What did I do with my 28 years? Holy cow, what did I do? Oh my goodness, what did I do? It just went by so fast. And then I realized I was at Jesus' feet, and I just buried my head in his gown and just sobbed. And he lifted my chin lovingly and he said, see. And the next thing I knew, I'm watching my parents date. I'm watching their childhoods. Wow. I'm watching them date. I'm seeing them both be beaten up and broken down so that God could make them the perfect puzzle piece to fit together to become one with him. And it was beautiful. And then I watched them count my little fingers and toes as I was born. I got to see all of it. And then I walked through every day of my life. But and it didn't seem like it was in fast forward. It didn't seem like a highlight reel. It seemed like every day of my life, except I knew the truth now. I knew that heaven was real. And so every time I saw an opportunity to share Jesus, which I now knew wasn't a coincidence, there's no such thing as coincidence, I just grew more and more ashamed. Like, God, what is wrong with me? I mean, I felt like the world's biggest narcissist. It was like, how could I just continue to fail and fail and fail? And at the end of it, I was just beside myself with, how could I have so deceived? How could I have really believed that I was giving my all to Jesus when I don't even remember half the stuff I did? It just went by so quick.
So when Jesus took me through my life the second time, and I was seeing things through his eyes, it was amazing watching myself be created with so much love and purpose. And the things, like I said, that I had always disliked about myself were actually things that were meant to be blessings to me and my character. It was amazing. And how much they enjoyed all of the things they were putting in me. And I know that goes for everybody. I've always hated how loud I am, but God loves it. He made me loud on purpose. That just blows my mind. Mm-hmm. But then it got even better. Mm-hmm. And Jesus again grabbed my chin and he said, child, see. And I'm still on my knees at his feet. And the next thing I know, I'm watching heaven pray and grieve as Jesus is getting prepared to come into the world. And they were so sad for what he was going to have to experience. It was really hard, and Jesus wanted to do it, but he knew it was going to be hard. And watching him choose to leave after being there, I couldn't fathom anything harder in the world. And I'd had a pretty hard life. And a lot of times, I also had a good life, but a lot of times it was really hard. And I couldn't fathom leaving this place. And Jesus never sinned. Why should he have to leave? Uh, It was so powerful, the depth of love that he and the Father and the Holy Spirit felt, and how it grieved them that he was doing this, but they all knew it was the only way for us to be with them for eternity. And then I was there when Jesus was born. I was back on earth. And I walked through every day of Jesus's life. I got to see
Wow.
I got to see what people don't get to see, what's not in the Bible. And it was amazing. And his first miracle that was recorded was water into wine. But I got to watch him resurrect little birds. I got to watch him do amazing things. And the thing that astounded me the most was, in our society, in our culture right now, it's very easy to get information. But it was very different when Jesus was a child. It wasn't like you just log on, or you even go to the library. The children weren't respected in the temples where God's word was being taught. And he was so hungry for it. He was obsessed with learning and memorizing every word of his Father. And watching the lengths he had to go to do that astounded me. I just assumed it was easy and he was just born with all that knowledge, but it wasn't. He was human. He had to work just like I do to memorize God's word.
My head down to the bottom until it had completely gone.
For many people, it isn't their encounter with Jesus or with God that brings them into Christianity, or at least not those experiences alone. But there is a seed planting process with their encounters with New Age modalities or with the paranormal that oftentimes open up the thinking for people that there is more to this life than just the physical. Such is the case with Lauren, who back in episode 30 shared her many paranormal experiences that set the stage for her coming to truth.
When I was real small, 2, 3 years old, so my mom has had to sort of tell me the things that I had told her. Apparently there was one time that my deceased grandmother, her mother, had appeared to me in a doorway of light and asked me to come with her, or told me to come with her. And of course I didn't go. But knowing what I know now about fairy lore and things like that, I definitely make a connection with the spirit world there. I don't think it would have been good at all if I had gone with her. And then things like seeing shadow people. I feel like I could go on for days, but there was one time that really sticks out in my mind, and always did. I think I was about 5 years old. And suddenly I woke up in the middle of the night, and this shadow figure was in my room and started walking towards me. And it bent down on its knee, like on one knee, like when somebody's going to propose, and folded its hands in prayer in front of my bed and bowed its head. And I thought that I was dreaming, so I closed my eyes really tightly and pulled the covers over my head and prayed, make it go away, make it go away. And I looked, and it was still there. And so I said, in my mind, said, go away, you don't belong here, I don't want you here, you're scaring me. And it didn't disappear right away. I'm sure if I had asked Jesus for help, it would have disappeared right away. But I didn't know at the time that you could do that. So it got up slowly, and the energy of it was kind of bewildered a little bit, a little confused, like, why did I want it to go away? And then it sort of took a few steps back and turned around and disappeared.
Wow.
Yeah, that's an event that really sticks out in my mind because it felt very personal. Even though I know it was a shadow being, it felt like it knew me. It felt like I should know it. And that was a really confusing experience that stuck with me through adulthood, and made me more curious, even more eager to find out where are these things coming from. And there were times where I saw a shadow figure out of the corner of my eye, and they just always kind of looked like they were observing, sort of. And as I got older, in my teen years, we moved to a house in South Carolina that was known as the haunted house. The first day on the bus, the kids were like, "Oh, you moved into the haunted house." So, that doesn't help when I was already haunted, as a child. Oh, and before I go there, my brother and I had a lot of shared experiences. And when we were living in Maryland still, there were these three demons. I guess they were demons. We'll call them shadow figures that followed us from house to house, actually. And we called them the farmers, me and my brother. Now, he's only 13 months younger than I am, so we're very close. We were very close then. And we would have the same dream, or what we thought was dreams, or like I would see them with my eyes and my brother would dream about them, or I would dream about them and he would see them. And there were these shadow figures that appeared to be farmers, like, for lack of a better term, as children, that's how we identified them, because even though they were all shadow, we could see they were larger shadow figures. We're not talking about like Slender Man type, but had a bulkier figures, the outline of overalls, the outline of straw hats, and they would file into our rooms. We had separate rooms, and they would file in one after the other and stand next to the bed and wake you up and stare at you. And then if you had a nightmare about them, they did the same thing, and they would scare you in your sleep. And these things followed us all the way till we were teenagers, actually, in South Carolina. And there was one night, so at this time I was about 16, I think, and I always slept with my door closed, and I was constantly being disturbed by things at night, and didn't really get good sleep. So I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself with these paranormal stories, because at this time, my mom and my dad had converted to Christianity. But just briefly, since it has to do with the shadow figures, I had accidentally slept with my door open that night, and my brother had the nightmare, and I saw them. And as soon as we met each other in the hall that morning, we both knew that we had seen them, and we had a discussion about it. And I think that was the last time that we saw them. But so that's definitely a shared experience. And my brother and I have had other shared paranormal experiences, so that I'm fairly certain they weren't psychological in nature or just imagined, because we both saw it at the same time. But going back to childhood, I would hear disembodied voices call my name. It sounded like my mom, but it wasn't my mom calling me. I would look into the mirror and see a shadow figure standing behind me. Stuff like that. And trying to think if anything else really. There's so many ghost stories and paranormal stories that it's hard to name them all. I know a common experience that a lot of people have is feeling like they're being watched in the shower. I know a lot of sensitive children have that same experience, where they're scared to close their eyes when they're in the shower or the bathtub, because it feels like somebody's right there and is going to startle them. That happened quite a bit, where I didn't want to close my eyes. I didn't want to sleep with the light off. It just always felt like something was around.
Yeah, I really appreciate you bringing up the shared experience, their experiences with your brother, because that is always, some people are always going to ask if this is psychological. And that is a great example of something where I think that you almost have to do more mental gymnastics to believe that this is all psychological when people are having shared experiences than to believe in the spiritual. I think that that's a
Hmm.
really good example of something that lends credence to what you're talking about. And then when you add that to everything else, such as what the psychic had told you,
Hmm.
as far as being sensitive, the family background that you have where people had experience or had ties to the occult, and then you take it outside of this realm, or outside of your story, and you look at several of the other stories out there that you can find all over the internet of people that have had similar experiences to you, and how
Yeah.
people are describing exact same situations as you are right here, and then saying that when you ask these creatures to go in Jesus' name, or you call on Jesus to help you, that these beings go just like that. That tells me that this is something more than just a psychological experience. There is something of a spiritual nature going on here. And again, I think you have to do a lot more just mental gymnastics, overthinking things to really come to any kind of conclusion that is anything other than the spiritual realm.
Yes, because there was one instance that if it were psychological in nature, my brother and I would have had to have the phenomenon known as shared psychosis. And I'm sure that there's a psychologist out there who could debate me on it and say, tell me why that happened. But to me, it makes a lot more sense that what we saw was spiritual in nature. Would you like me to share that story?
Please.
Okay. Well, I think that I was 16 and he was 15, I believe. I might have been 15 and 14, but somewhere in that age range. And we had just returned, me and him and our mother, from grocery shopping, and we were bringing the groceries in to our haunted house. And without having to, I don't want to try to describe the floor plan and stuff, but we were bringing groceries in from the back door into the kitchen. And to get into the kitchen, you have to go into this part of this hallway that leads to the front door, and rooms that go off on either side, like the dining room on the right and the laundry room and the bathroom on the left. And so we're turning the corner together with these bags in our hands, and suddenly from the right side to the left side of the hallway, so from the dining room going into the laundry room, an apparition walked across the hallway. It was as real as Miriam standing there or walking. And so it was striding, and it looked like it was clutching something to its chest. It was wearing a black cloak, and tall boots, um, and it was hard to make out anything else because of the cloak, but it had a hood over its head, and the cloak came down to about its knees, and it wasn't walking on the floor, it was walking sort of higher up in the air. But you could tell it was sort of on the shorter side. My brother and I are pretty tall. I'm 5'10" and he's 6'4", 6'5". So to us, it was kind of on the shorter side. I would say maybe 5'5", 5'7", maybe. And it strode across just clear as day, and it wasn't scary or anything. Like, I feel like some apparitions intentionally try to scare you. It didn't seem that way. It was just an anomaly, just like we saw something we weren't supposed to see, and it didn't pay any attention to us. It looked like it was going somewhere. It was on a mission, and we looked at each other. I said, "Did you see that?" He said, "I saw that." And then, as literally seconds later, as we're standing there, it went back the other way. It went from the laundry room back into the dining room.
Wow. Yeah,
100% for sure. We both saw it.
yeah, that's really, really fascinating, because I think, like you said, a lot of times these things will intentionally try to scare you. But in this particular case, it seems like it was just there, as we know, about the enemy. He tries to cause confusion and chaos. So
Yeah.
seeing something like this, I think just probably further lended credence to your understanding that yes, there is a spiritual world going on, and perhaps even subconsciously helped you believe in the idea of like, ghosts and people being trapped and those types of things. Because that's, we understand that that's what the enemy's trying to do. He obviously hates us. He'll do anything he can to hurt us and scare us, but he's also here to attack our mind. And this is a perfect example of that by just causing confusion as well with something like this. And we see this a lot with ghost hunters, investigators, people that are caught in trying to investigate this exact type of phenomena. Sometimes, unfortunately, they get trapped in that for decades. So yeah, absolutely, just incredible. And again, lending further credence to this being much more than psychological, more likely happening than what you thought before. Speaking of ghosts, that's actually one of the most common ways that demons can deceive people into believing that there is no heaven or hell, and also helps plant seeds that Christianity is not valid. Listen to this excerpt from back in episode 18, where former ghost hunter Dana Emanuel describes an encounter that a man had with what he thought was the ghost of a little girl, but ended up having an absolutely horrifying encounter with a demon.
That we went to, but what happened was the man that lives in the house, so when I say man, he was probably about like 19 years old. He was a young man, but he was always at this house with the girl. They were like best friends, and I'm pretty sure he lived there. If not, they were like best friends. He was always there, but he was getting thrown, like thrown up against the wall and thrown up against the refrigerator. I heard that one too. But this entity was violent with him. And so one time when it threw him, it hurt his back. So he went to the hospital. And when he went to the hospital, the doctor, when he told the doctor what happened, the doctor sent him to Circles of Care, which here in Florida, it's a place that it's a mental institution. And so anyway, it was for observation and evaluation. So while he was there, and he had told the nurse there what happened. Well, the nurse actually was also into the paranormal. Well, she believed him. So she went ahead and she contacted a friend of mine, which was also this other lady had her own group also. So she called and she asked if we could take the case because she had so many cases. She didn't have time to do this one too. And so I said, oh, sure, especially knowing that it was physical attacks. I mean, I know it sounds crazy, but a lot of investigators like to get those cases. You know what I'm saying?
Sure.
They feel like it's more paranormal activity is going to happen and all this. So we like to get the more severe cases. So the man got out of Circles of Care the next week. So we had set it up to go that next week. Well, when we went there, a lot of the EVPs we got was nasty EVPs. Actually, that happened at the preliminary investigation. We went there just to ask questions before we went there for the big investigation. So anyway, we got a lot of nasty EVPs and stuff. So we were a little bit worried, like, oh boy, what's going to happen, So actually, one of the members went to a Catholic church and talked to the priest there and asked, well, what should we do to make sure that we're safe and all this? Well, he gave her a bottle of holy water, So anyway, we took that with us too. And of course, I had my little spiritual cleaning case, and it had sage in it and rosary beads, all this. And I'm not even Catholic, but that's how it worked. So anyway, I took all these things with us, and so when we first got there, we're walking around and we're putting this water and we're over the doors and praying over the doors and everything, and so actually one of my investigators on my team came up to me and he's like, "Why are you doing that?" And I said, "Well, I just want to make sure that we're safe and maybe, we'll get rid of it." And he was saying, "Why are you doing that? We want something to happen first. We want to get evidence." And I'm like, oh my goodness, these people's having a problem here, and they want to get rid of it. But anyway, that's how it is. That's how a lot of investigators are. It's all about the evidence. But so anyway, while we were there, we got a little bit of things happening. We were asking questions. We were using dowsing rods, by the way. Dowsing rods are these copper little things that they're little wands. They're shaped like an L, and they're what people used to use for what they call water witching. And they would go around. We would go around with them, and they would have a little loose little cylinder around the handle of them, so that way they could swing freely. When we'd ask questions. So we would say, first we would establish what is your yes, and then it would either wise open up or close. So if it opened up, then we'd say, what is your no, and then it would close. So we would find out that before we start asking questions. So we would ask questions, and next thing you know, the door would open, and then next thing you know, it would start to close, and so we were getting a little bit of activity. So it got to where it was getting late, and the guy came there. Actually, what he did was he left because the family was trying to give us the house for the night up until probably around 3 o'clock is what we told them, and let us have a run of the house. So a couple of them went off. Well, there was a couple that stayed there. It was the girl's grandmother and mother. They were sitting on the porch watching the monitor systems, of the cameras that we had set up. And so he finally come back, and he asked me, he says, what's going on? And we told him, and he says, well, why don't you let me go in there with you? Because whatever it is, it doesn't like me. Maybe it'll react if I'm in there. And we were like, oh man, you're going to get, what if it throws you or does something, And he was like, no, it's okay. I'm here all the time, So we're like, well, he's always here. So what's it matter, So we let him go in there with us. And my daughter and me was sitting on the bed. And so I had the handheld camcorder, and my daughter was like right behind me. So the other investigator that was going to use the dowsing rods, he was sitting across from me. And then the man was standing next to him, facing me and him, kind of watching what the dowsing rods did and all this. So, excuse me. So he started asking the questions, and he was asking it like, he was trying to provoke it. And he was like, do you like, I'll just say Dawn, because I don't want to use a real name. And do you like Dawn? And it said no. And then he says, are you afraid of Dawn? And it said no. And so he finally asked the last question. It was like he was really provoking it. And he says, so why don't you come out so I can kick your. And next thing you know, this dowsing rod come back like really swift, And then we could hear like a little bit of, and I didn't hear it to my naked ear, while it happened. It was actually on the recorder that I heard it afterwards. But there was a light little growl. And next thing you know, Dawn just went, it happened so fast and so hard. We thought, honestly, that something hit the outside of the house, like a car or a plane. It was that loud. It was so loud,
Wow.
And so this guy, what happened was he was facing this way. And next thing you know, when we turned the light on to see what happened, because it was dark, and we were I was looking through the infrared camera, and with the infrared, you could see, at nighttime. So I could see the one doing the dowsing rods, and then I barely could see something move next to him when it happened. So I turned the light on, and there he is. He's turned around all the way around, and he's laying up against the wall like this. And there was a file cabinet right between him and the wall. The file cabinet had a big dent in it. And so he was laying there, and next thing you know, he starts crying. Now, this is a big guy. He seemed like somebody that would be prideful and not, you know what I mean? Not
Sure.
showing his feelings in front of people or anything, but he started crying. And I was like, oh my gosh, And so, we were talking to him, and finally we got him up, And once we got him up, he started cussing. And he was like, where are you at? Come out now. I mean, he was fed up. This thing, it was hurting him. I mean, it was attacking him. And so they took him, and tried to get him outside. Well, to back up just a little bit, after he got thrown, we were yelling out the door at the people that was on the porch to come in, because we didn't know. We thought we was going to need help. We didn't know if we was going to need an ambulance or what, but they came in. Well, it took a few minutes for them to come in. And when they come in there, what happened was they told us that the grandmother had just got thrown off the porch. So wow. Not only did it throw him, but it threw the grandmother off the front porch. So this was supposedly the spirit of a little girl. Because when we came there to do the preliminary investigation, and we, was asking questions and everything, the young lady that lived there, now I think she was probably around 16, 17 years old. She, all of a sudden, she was going into trances is what she would do, which actually, looking back at it all, that was probably what was inviting something in. But she was doing these trances and stuff, and all of a sudden she would act like a young girl that was being abused by her father. And she ran into the closet, and she was sitting there, and she was acting like he was doing stuff to her, and and all this. So she would tell us it's Amanda. I think that was the name of it. That the spirit's name is Amanda. She's only, I forget how old, maybe 5 or something like that. She told us years old, and she was killed here and by her father and all this stuff. So we believed that it was the spirit of a little girl, but after it was thrown, it made me think, because there's one thing that the paranormal community does agree upon, most of them, is that sometimes demonic spirits will pretend to be the spirit of a little girl or somebody vulnerable that you would have pity on. You know what I mean? Like maybe a woman that was trying to get away from her husband, or an evil man in the house was keeping her there and she couldn't leave. She was trapped, stuff like that. So we thought, I was thinking to myself, what if, how do we know that if sometimes that's the case, how do we know that's not always the case?
Or running at it. And,
Back in episode 4, ironically, or perhaps not so much, author Mark Hunneman actually had a demonic encounter when he was writing his book, Seeing Ghosts Through God's Eyes, a book meant to expose the connection between ghosts and demonic deception.
Number one, I had that experience in the park, right? Secondly, while I was writing the book, I was sitting in a chair similar to what I'm sitting in now, kind of an easy chair. And I was leaning forward like this, probably halfway through the book. And it was probably 2 o'clock in the morning. I wrote from midnight, or 10 o'clock at night, until about 6 in the morning. And I was at peace. I was enjoying, I loved writing, but just out of the blue, it's like something pumped fear inside of me. I wasn't afraid of anything. There was nothing to be afraid of, but it was like an outside force was pumping fear, a cloud of fear on top of me. And then all of a sudden I was slammed back. It was like an invisible hand on my chest. I was slammed back in my chair. And I won't repeat to your audience what the voice then said to me, but there was a audible voice to the left, my left ear, that said, "Mark, you are," and it went on to cuss me out.
Worse after that, the depression, the sightings. I started
back in episode 39. Author Jason December showed us with his experiences that demonic deception is not exclusive to just the ghost phenomenon, but also extends to the alien and UFO phenomenon as well. All of which, again, showing that Christianity is truth and Jesus is the only way.
The night that I was, it was probably a week before the end, I was playing bass in my living room, and we had a pool that separated my window. If I looked outside my living room window, there was the pool, and then directly across was an apartment that had a patio, and they would face us. We're looking at each other. I remember I was playing my bass that night, and I had the blinds open and the slider open, and I looked up and I saw 4 entities with my eyes, no phone, nothing, and they were dancing, literally dancing to the music that I was playing. And the only way I can describe them is they were between 2 to 3 feet tall, and they had these like, they were horrible looking, but they had these like tentacles that would hang down like off their faces, and they were a little bit different and a little bit different size. And I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe I finally was seeing something with my real eyes. It was ridiculous. It scared the living shit out of me. Excuse me, but it scared me so much. I couldn't even stop playing. I was watching it, and the feeling and the thought was going through my mind. I put down the bass. I obviously ran towards. I didn't look again. I shut the blinds. I shut the door. My girlfriend came home with groceries. I got her inside, and that's when things. In accompanying that experience, we were having supernatural events and things happening in the home that were so over the top that the only way to describe it is that I was being targeted. And if people out there don't know what that is, look it up. It was like an MK Ultra experience. I felt like I was being monitored, and I felt like I was some test patient, and that they were doing somebody was doing something to me. I was completely full of paranoia at that time. A few days later, my wife needed to go to spend some time with her sister in Arizona, and I was going to be left alone. And that's the night when things changed. I was sitting in the living room, and she was going to be gone for 2 days, and it was about, I think, 11:30 or 12, maybe close to midnight. I had the blind shut, was watching television. I had a light on. The kitchen was to my left. TV was in front of me. And to my right was the sliding glass door. All of a sudden, I looked to my right, and within 6 feet of me, through the blinds, I see eyes. The size of those eyes that I had seen the previous time when I saw those entities. For some reason, I knew in my mind that they were coming in. I didn't know how they were going to get in, but they were here to talk to me, or like communicate with me. I knew for sure. And I literally went into fight or flight mode. How you got in our apartment, there's no way I could have gotten out the front door without passing them. So I was kind of locked in, and I started screaming. I didn't know what else to do. We knew the neighbor lived next door to us, Rudy, and he knew some of the things that were happening, and I'm really loud. I could be really, really loud. I started screaming, and I'm screaming, and I'm screaming, and I'm screaming. And I knew that this was the end. My heart was pounding so fast. I knew I was going to have a heart attack. I was sure of it in my mind. It's like, you're going to die, because once these things either manifest through the glass or however this happens, whatever's going to happen, you can't handle it. You were not created to handle this type of experience. So I was going to have a heart attack, and I was screaming. I was crying. It was the worst terror I'd ever experienced in my entire life. I've been in some really sketchy experiences before. I mean, this was over the top, and it was just, you're going to die right now. At the moment Alex, I just felt like I was going to take my last breath, I looked up, I cried out. I remember going, Jesus. I go, Jesus, please, God, Jesus. Just as loud. For no one to have heard me screaming and crying that night would be impossible. So I was in some type of a Oz factor. I was in some type of a bubble. I truly believe I was in those bubbles many times, but there's no way no one would have heard me. Nevertheless, I look to my left for some reason, and I see a figure of Jesus Christ, the way that people would think of him, in a robe with a brown belt around his thing, and he's not standing 6 feet, but he's like floating. He's probably, it looked like a hologram. And I see his profile, and he's looking, and these two entities, which looked like Bitmojis, were crouched down below him, like fearful of him. They could barely look at him. And I'm looking at this scene, and I'm like, are you kidding me right now? Like, this is, I'm just like, this is too much. It's just too much. So I look down, And I go, okay, this isn't happening. I remember going like this with my eyes, and I looked back, and he was still there. As I saw him the second time, his profile and his figure, I looked to my right. The eyes were gone from the things were gone from the window. They were standing right there looking in, and I dropped to my knees, and I remember crying, and every single fear I had ever had, everything I'd ever felt from 2013 through May of 2016 was gone.
His wife was taking him to this little church.
One of the most interesting things about Christianity and the supernatural is that when you present compelling supernatural evidence that shows that Christianity is real to non-believers, many times they will just dismiss the evidence outright, no matter how compelling the evidence is. Back in episode 13, author, researcher, and MUFON director Joseph Jordan found this out, again as it relates to the alien and UFO abduction phenomenon and how it ties to demonic deception and Jesus and Christianity being truth.
Trying to learn to be what a Christian is. Brand new. And then he has this experience one night. It got dark. He was seeing lights over the tree line where he was at. Very, like I said, very rural area. His dogs started barking. They were agitated. He was thinking maybe, those lights must be drug or helicopters looking for drugs or something in the woods, which they do a lot of in Florida. But he didn't make nothing of it. Quieted his dogs down, went ahead and went to bed. When he went to sleep, he had this dream, what he thought was a dream, and it was absolutely horrific. And the dream was of an experience, abduction experience. And there was a point in the experience that was very painful. He felt like he was being held up on a pole, shoved up his rectum. And he was in sheer agony and pain and fear. And the only thing that could come to mind was what they had told him in that little church. Jesus is there to protect you. If you're ever in need of something, you cry out, Jesus, help me. So as a last resort, only thing that could come to his mind was what they told him. He says he called out, Jesus, 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 or Jesus, help me. And immediately, instantly, he was dropped into the bed and woke up. His wife woke up. Experience abruptly stopped. Gone. Period. Blink of an eye. And we're sitting there looking at this testimony. I'm going, do you remember this? And my partner says, I have no idea what we just watched. And we're either seeing something that is made up, mistaken, or I don't know what. Or maybe it was real. We had no answer for it. But we did know, I knew, that if this was real, this was huge. Because I told you that the secular realm has no answer to whether this can be stopped or not. They say it cannot. Everything that they had put out in the research that we had consumed to help protect these people told us that the experience could not be stopped. Everything. All the publications. So here I am puzzled by a testimony that we have where a guy stopped his experience while it was happening. And even more, how he did it. So I'm like, I don't know if this is real or not. But I know this would be huge if it is to the whole community. Because this backs up what the Lord showed me, that this is not real and it's demonic. And they have to respond to that name. Scripture tells us that. So my only hope was to get an answer someplace from somebody else that knows this stuff. So I contacted the leading researchers in the realm. I got their phone numbers. I called them up. I said, guys, I got this unusual case here. I wonder if you could help me with. Sure, tell me what you got. So I'd shared a story with him. After each one sharing the story, they all asked the same thing. Did we go off the record? Meaning, I can't tell you who said what, but I can tell you what they said. I said, fine with me. I'm just asking for some help here. I said, I can respect your anonymity. I'm MUFON. That's a requirement that if somebody asks for anonymity, we have to give it to them by law. And I said, I'm bound by that. So no problem. I'm not going to reveal who says this. Just help me out. And their answer was, all of them, the answer was, we had come across very similar cases where people had prayed during the experience, hum a Christian hymn, recited prayer, or recited scripture, and the experience stopped. I said, wait a minute. Everything that we have read says it cannot be stopped. And now you're telling me that you've got case histories that have been stopped and all been stopped in this type of manner? And they're saying yes. And I said, well, my next question is, why have you never shared this? The answer that they gave me was, we didn't know what to make of it. And you know what? I could have walked away right there and been fine with that answer. No problem. You gave me an honest answer. But they weren't honest. And they knew they weren't. So they gave me another answer to back it up. And that answer was, we were afraid to go there because it might affect our credibility in the UFO realm.
Just incredible.
What do you call that? Withholding information. These are the people that everybody's relying on for the truth. And yet they're going to withhold information. What is that called? That's a cover up.
That's right.
But yet they put all of the cover up on the government. But yet the cover up all along has been through the leading researchers in the UFO community, because they want this UFO picture to look a certain way. But if you don't bring all the pieces to the table, all the puzzle pieces to the table, you're never going to get a full picture anyway. And I think that's what they're up to. This is why we don't have answers, because they're not willing to bring all the pieces to the table.
Of course, one of the most compelling pieces of evidence that points towards Christianity being true is that when people get involved in these different New Age, alien abduction, or paranormal types of phenomena, there's often a need for deliverance of the demonic out of an individual. Back in episode 15, author Ivany shared her deliverance testimony as she was involved heavily in the occult and Ubanda spiritism.
Even the children, my kids who were my daughter was 11, my son was 13, 14, maybe 14 at the time. And they were feeling and hearing things in the house, and they would not go in my room. I didn't know this until later, that they refused. They were petrified to go in my room by themselves because they felt like a horrible force there, something that was not good. And we didn't believe in, we didn't believe in demons or anything like that. So, and there were a lot of noises that happened throughout the night, and it kept getting worse, especially after the pastor came. There were like things falling, breaking, and you could wake everybody up, and we couldn't find anything. Just crazy stuff kept happening. And my husband said, can you at least come and pray, and bless the house? Because we were still in that, mentality that, there's contamination, and bad spirits need to go, good spirits need to stay. So the pastor came to my house after a lot of, conversation. Yes, no, I didn't want anything to do with him. He came. And my son saw this happen again. It happened again. And I think this time was worse. But I wasn't willing to give it up. I didn't believe that it was bad. I believed that was my spirit guide, and that he was the one fooling everybody. But after he left, my son was horrified, and my nephew too. My nephew experienced it. My nephew said that his hairs on his arm just stood on end because I looked at them. They were upstairs, like leaning over the stairs, looking at what was happening downstairs while the pastor was praying. And my nephew said that I just looked up at them with these like black eyes and just mouthed to them, "Help me." And I don't remember this, but it was the demon messing with them. And my son and my nephew said, "Please, do whatever this pastor's saying," because it was scary. And they described it to me. And every time my nephew would tell me, his hair would just stand on end. And so finally, there were other things that happened, but finally, God showed me that I needed to. It got to the point that I knew that this, whatever it was not good. It was harming me. It was harming my family. And I needed to get rid of it. And the only way to get rid of it was through Christ. So, there was preparation for deliverance. He asked, I can't say that I had converted yet because I was still being possessed and I was still oppressed. And I still kind of held on to that. It was still hard for me to let go. And I was doing it kind of forcibly at the time. But then at the same time, it was very confusing. It was scary because my family had converted. They were new Christians. They were learning, and they didn't even know how to pray. And we didn't know anything about the Bible. But he had everybody pray and fast, and he didn't want anybody in my house except myself, him, and his wife. And then my sister was allowed to come, and I didn't know my sister was there throughout this process. But it was the same thing. So he and his wife started praying for me when they arrived. And before they arrived, I was so influenced by the spiritual being, this demon, that I literally decided that I wasn't going to stay in the house. And I picked up my keys and I ran out to open the door. And when I opened the door, he was already standing there. It was like, run, run, run. It was really telling me to get out. And so when they came in, everybody, like I said, I was fasting too. That was the first time I ever fasted in my life. I had no idea what fasting was. I mean, we did it for certain events with the Umbanda, but I never knew that other people did it. So, but this was complete fasting, 24 hours before, and I couldn't pray. He had given me a Bible. I couldn't read it. It was impossible for me to read it. And so when they started praying again, I became possessed. And I think it was 5:00 in the afternoon when it started, about 5. And I just remember glimpses of what happened. I remember, once I became possessed, that I was going through the house and grabbing things that were, I had everything you can imagine, occult in my house that had been consecrated to the demons that I worshipped. So I remember kind of going through drawers and, pulling things out. I even remember going in the backyard and digging the dirt because I had buried, I mean, this is crazy, but I had buried one of the saints upside down. This was to sell the house, or just crazy things that we did. Everything you can imagine, besides this, we can talk later about other things that I practiced that I believed in, palm reading and tarot cards and all that stuff. So I had all that stuff in my house. I had books, I had CDs, I had images, the beads, whatever you can imagine. It was all over my house, saturated, things on the wall. So the whole process was going through and clearing this, and this demon refused to go. It was a big battle. And most of what I got, like I said, I had glimpses, kind of like in a dream, I remember some things clearly, other things I don't remember at all, because my sister was there, and of course the pastor and his wife, they told me later what happened. But the craziest thing that happened was when the spirit was cast out, and I remember the yelling of, the pastor saying in the name of Jesus Christ, get out. And it was the final, because he was trying throughout this time, throughout the deliverance process, he was trying. And demon refused to leave. It was my entire life, you know. It was so when he yelled that, I remember this clearly, that I felt my body kind of like go up, and not kind of, my body went up in the air backwards like this, and it was in
Wow.
a hallway. I had a long hallway, and I felt my body just flying backwards, and it flew a few feet back like this, and I felt, when I fell, you know, I on my back, and I remember thinking, oh my gosh, I'm going to crash my head on the tile. It was all tile. It was so crazy, because Alex, I can't even tell you. I fell, and as soon as I fell, something was just like exploded, like out. Like I never felt. I opened my eyes. I was still laying down on the floor, and I looked up, and I'm looking around, and literally, my entire life, there was like this veil that was like, everything was kind of like dark, that was lifted, and it was, I never saw so much brightness in my life, so much color in my life. I just looked around, like, and I felt so light. I felt so happy, and I accepted Christ, of course, and I just never. Oh, so I looked at the clock, and when I looked at the clock, it was 2 o'clock in the morning. So 8 hours had passed. And
Wow.
I swear, I mean, God is my witness. I know we're not supposed to swear, but to God, but God is my witness that throughout this time, when I opened my eyes, I figured it had been about 2 hours. You feel the time pass, you know, when you're, no, I could not believe 8 hours, that all this took 8 hours. And normally it doesn't. Normally, you know, people are delivered with a prayer. It happens differently, just like in the Bible, just like these examples that I gave you. You know, Jesus does everybody. He doesn't have a format. He doesn't have a formula to, you know, this prayer, do this, do that, use this, use that. No, he delivers us. He heals us the way he wants to do it, and the way that he needs to do it.
You know, I know I've got an issue, but I'm trying to play it off and be Mr. Cool and kind of like.
One of the most important parts of all this is not just the supernatural encounter in and of itself, but the takeaway behind the encounter. What did the person learn from their supernatural experience? One of the most memorable takeaways from all the episodes so far goes all the way back to episode 1, when Tim had an incredible near-death experience, but it was the takeaway, the lesson learned from the experience, that I remember the most.
I mean, as I lean back, I am just instantly, I'm outside. I'm to my right here. My body falls back into the golf cart, and I'm sitting. You have to excuse me. I get just a little emotional, but I just remember, you know, that I was in a lot of stress and dizzy. You know, just didn't feel good, nauseous, just really bad. And then just in the split second, man, I was outside, and I see my body, and my body is still leaning back. As my body leans completely back in the back, it's like this burst, this white light just comes out, because I could see everybody and everything around me. For that, this all just happened in just a couple seconds. So it was just this bright light, and it just surrounded me. But then there was like this wall, which I call a veil. It was just like the light was so thick, and I couldn't see through it. But there was people over there, and I could see movement, like people were there. It was just some colors, but I could feel their presence. It's hard to explain, but I just knew there were people there, and I knew they were there for me. I knew that they loved me, and I didn't hear any voices as far as like a sound or audible voices. But it was the best way I can describe is it was somebody's like somebody else's thoughts were put into my head. But anyway, I had this. It was kind of like I was just reminded of what I had just come through, what had just happened to me, and I was then told, another download of that, none of that matters, that the only thing in this life that matters is what we do for the kingdom of God.
Wow.
And then I was just kind of like, yeah. And then I was given what I call a life review. It was just, it was basically just the amount of time I've been here, and of that time, how much of it was spent for the kingdom of God. And I just remember thinking, what a waste. And I knew at this point, I just knew that my time on earth was gone, was over. I didn't look at it as I was dead necessarily, but I knew what that meant. But I just knew my time on earth was over, and it was just like that was okay. And there was just things I guess you just say you just kind of knew, because it was like it just dawned on me, that like when in the video I talked about that I knew the Bible was real. It was like I just knew it was real. It's like I just kind of like I just remembered or whatever. Whereas in life, and I believed in God, I believed in Jesus. That's what I would have told you, and I did believe in him, but I guess there was some doubt there, because in this life, this reality that we feel right now is nothing. It's very dull compared to what you feel wherever I was.
To speak to somebody who may be on a similar path as or kind of in episode 48, Michelle, who was formerly in the New Age, had a really insightful message for those who are still spiritually seeking themselves.
That's a tough one. Because I understand where people are coming from, and I understand the desire to feel acceptance and to feel love from everything that I've experienced in the different paths that I've walked. I would just tell someone, I would ask someone really to just give God a chance. Not saying people have to instantly join Christianity, but give God a chance, a relationship with the Lord. Get to know Jesus and what he did for you, because all of these other paths, these spiritual paths, while they seem enticing now and you may have good experiences now, it's temporary and a lot of it falls away. And in the end, what matters is your spirit. And where do you want to be? Do you want eternal salvation? Do you want an eternity of joy and peace? Or do you want to let the world suck you into the work of the enemy and lose that opportunity to have true joy and peace, to have true eternal life with someone that loves you more than you could ever imagine, somebody that gave their life for you to save you? And I would just ask them to give that a chance. Your life may be hard right now. You may feel like nobody on this earth loves you. You may be searching for healing the way that I was. And the only true rest that you will get is with the Lord if you just give him a chance and just get to know him. Pray about it, read the Bible if you can, and just go into it with an open mind and an open heart, because if you're already open to the New Age path or spirituality, just be open to God, and just give that a chance, because if you can stop where you're at now and prevent yourself from facing demonic attacks, demonic oppression, or digging yourself into a hole that you may not get out of, if you could stop now and give God a chance, it's worth it.
Struggling through life and just couldn't find any fulfillment anywhere. And finally, Kimberly, back in episode 26, shared a really incredible message that comes back to our individualized relationships with God that she would share with her past self, and by way of that, share with other people that are in the same shoes that she was in.
You know, it is very surreal where I am. I did not expect to. People describe me as on fire for the Lord. I'm very zealous. It is definitely surreal to have come full circle. As far out, because again, I grew up watching a lot of movies, and I have always loved stories, and I just think what I believe in, right, which is the gospel and that the Bible is true. My favorite genre of film before was sci-fi. It's science fiction, but I just liked the craziness of those films, like just the far out, mind-boggling storylines of it. I just feel like the reality that I now live in is the most far out story anyone could ever believe in. Like, I don't even think, like, you can't make this stuff up. Like, you just can't.
Right. Right.
And the fact that, you know, the whole saying, like, truth is stranger than fiction, it's like, that's so true. Like, again, Jesus is the Son of God, but was also 100% human, but was also 100% God, is God, but is also separate from God. And point is he came down after having so many prophecies told about him before his time, like even where he was born. That's something that he can't control. Just so many things, and him dying on the cross and him coming back to life, and just believing in that gives me salvation so that I could live. Like, that sounds so nuts. And I am acknowledging that, and I'm aware of that. And I'm just here to say, friends, that it is beautifully and magnificently true. And it is the best reality to live in, because say you believe in it, right? And you die. And it was all just a big, fat story. It's not real. When you actually live as God calls us to live, that's a beautiful way to live. Like, you're loving others well. You're, to the best of your ability, living a life of integrity. That's a great way to live. And there's a lot of beautiful people within the faith. But it's also, again, about studying the word and having discernment against which Christians are, you know, actually have a faith or not. But it's just a great way. But then say if you die and it's all true, well, thank God you believed in it, because it's true. So I just, like, I don't know. But anyways, it is very surreal. But to get to your final question, what would I tell my young self that was fantasizing about death? I'd have to be gentle, because she was very fragile. And also, I couldn't be too far out, because she probably wouldn't be able to grasp it or believe it. She'd probably just dismiss it. So I'd probably say something like, hey, I know what you're going through is really difficult. And I know that life right now really sucks. But I just want to let you know that if you hang in there and you keep going and following your curiosities, that there's a huge light at the end of the tunnel. And it is so worth it.
Wow. Powerful. I love that. Following your curiosities.
Yeah. The Lord told me that, to follow my curiosities.
Well, that is it for episode 50, everybody. Thank you for listening. And I hope you enjoyed that trip down memory lane from the first year's worth of episodes as much as I did. And wow, what an assortment of guests and experiences and takeaways from the first year of Spirit Answers podcast. And I certainly couldn't do all that on my own. This is, when I look back on the clips from this episode, it is totally all God. And I'm just so thankful that he was able to line up the right people at the exact right time to come on the podcast and share their testimonies, their knowledge, their wisdom with not only you, but with me. I've learned a ton over the last year. It's just been such an incredible journey, and I'm so thankful that I've been able to share it with you. I just want to say again, thank you for everything that you've done to support the podcast over the last year. Again, whether that's listening, donating, sharing your testimony, sharing, just coming on for an interview, sharing insight with us. I could not do without you. I really appreciate all that you have done over the last year. And if you're new to this podcast, this episode 50 being your first one, and perhaps you're new to this Christianity thing, I'm hoping that this was able to at least plant a seed for you that perhaps there is something more to this life than just the physical. There is a supernatural component to life, and as amazing as that is, that supernatural element doesn't happen in a vacuum. It all leads back eventually to Jesus, and there being only one way to heaven and one way to truth. And if you are still on the fence about that, I hope and pray that you will continue to give us at this podcast a chance and use us as a resource, just like I said back in episode 1 with the other spiritual resources that you are using along your journey. I will be taking next week off. I'll be out of town, and we will be back in 2 weeks with a brand new episode. Again, thank you for all you've done to support the podcast for the last year. I hope you will meet us in our Facebook group, Spirit Answers, and I hope that you share your testimony so perhaps you can be on the next compilation episode that we do down the road. I hope you all have a fantastic couple weeks. I will be praying for you. Take care. Bye-bye.